people want fulfillment. They want development in their role. In the traditional environment, you maybe received feedback on your annual performance evaluation. Now people want to know where they stand throughout the year. They want coaching. They want to feel like they have a connection to their company. And all of that requires great leaders.
Hello and welcome to Center for Victory's podcast of Your Best Day Yet. At Center for Victory, we're here to help unlock, reinforce, and enrich relationships through personal and professional development. I'm Eric Guy, Chief Victory Officer at the Center for Victory. With us today is Laurie Maddalena, and she is a professional speaker, executive coach, and leadership development consultant. We probably have a lot in common, and we'll unpack that as we go about today. But we also are going to talk about her book, The Elevated Leader, and we're going to talk a little bit about that and how that has evolved. But just a little bit about her before we get started, and I'll let her tell the rest of the story. Two things that we don't get training for: parenting and leadership. Yes. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. For the past 15 years, Laurie's modern leadership approach has helped thousands of mid-level and executive managers lead their teams with less stress and more confidence. Leadership has evolved dramatically over the past 25 years, yet most organizations have leaders who still follow a traditional, outdated approach. Laurie's programs teach managers a modern leadership approach so they can create cultures where people live and come to work. By 30 years old, Laurie was the vice president of organizational development and human resources at a credit union that was fast growing. And I'm going to leave it at that because I have a question that relates to that because, well, let's just wait. Welcome, Laurie.
Thank you, Eric. Fantastic to be here.
Yeah. What did I miss with your bio?
You hit a lot on the head there, which is, I really want to help organizations create places where people enjoy their work, where they love to come to work, because most people are not engaged. 31% of employees are not engaged in their work, or rather, 31% of employees are engaged. So most people are not, almost 70%. So
Yeah.
there's truly work to be done.
Okay. Yes, there is. And we're going to unpack that book too. But before I forget, it's called The Elevated Leader. Um, I assume they can get it on Amazon.
That's
Can they?
right.
All right. All right. So you've said, I want to start with that first piece there because, we do a lot. That's how I cut my teeth, was on parenting relationships. We still do some of those seminars as well. And that's what got me into the leadership and the executives and coaching executives as well. But you said leadership and parenting are two areas where people rarely receive formal training. How did your early experiences in leadership and later as a mother shape what you're currently doing now?
Yeah, so my first experience as a supervisor when I was first promoted, I was in my early 20s and I worked for an insurance company. And one day my manager came to me and said, we're going to hire someone to help you, and that person's going to report to you. And I received zero training at all. And no one even sat down with me and said, here's what our expectations are, or here's what you should do when you're leading a person. And so I thought my role was to just give her direction and answer questions. It didn't help that she was also probably about 20 years older than me. So there was a generational divide there too. And I felt really lost. And I really believe that this is most leaders' experiences, that they
Mm-hmm.
haven't been given the training. And as things have evolved over the years, it's become even more complex with 5 generations in the workplace, with the shifting role of what leaders need to do today. I believe it's never been harder to be a leader than in today's environment. And so that shaped my early part of my career of, not really having the skills or feeling the confidence to lead. And then fast forward to where I started my business a couple years in. I had my family, and so I have 3 kids now. And I find that people want to be able to enjoy their life outside of work and have a fulfilling career as well as a fulfilling personal life. And I think the traditional model of leadership was really more around sacrifice, of you sacrificed your personal life to come to work to support your family. and it was about tenure and how long you were at a company and loyalty. And a lot has shifted. And so having children made me realize that a lot of leaders are experiencing this demand that they have on their time, with wanting to have time for their family as well as to thrive at work. And that's challenging if you don't have the skills to do that.
Yeah. Um, you said leadership has evolved significantly, and I agree with that. What are some of those key differences you've observed between traditional and modern leadership practices?
Yeah, so I believe that in the traditional model, many people were promoted based on their technical abilities. And so if you were great at your job, that was usually, well, we're going to promote you now to lead the team. And you could get away with that, I think, for a long time of in this environment that was more about telling and fixing and getting in the trenches and moving things along. That model worked for a while until it didn't. And then when we started to evolve, and I really think a lot of things happened in society that led to this over time of, this sort of slow evolution that then just got faster and faster. More women in the workplace, two parents both in the household now working, and so you didn't have someone dedicated, those typical gender norms as maybe in the traditional environment. And then I mentioned 5 generations in the workplace of
Hmm.
people started having more choices and experiences that led them to want to experience work differently. And so quality of life is very important to people now. And I think of any generation really, but in the traditional environment, there really wasn't that focus. And so if you fast forward to today, where development in their role, in the traditional environment, you maybe received feedback on your annual performance evaluation. Now people want to know where they stand throughout the year. They want coaching. They want to feel like they have a connection to their company. And all of that requires great leaders. But
Hmm.
unfortunately, most people were not set up to lead very well.
All right. I'm already going to break our little script here. All right. Because one of the things that I always get asked, see, especially lately, is this connection with the company thing. And you mentioned it. You said people, want to have that connection with a company. And what's your thoughts around that?
I believe that people want to feel like their direct manager is invested in them as a person and not just a worker.
Hmm.
And certainly the whole culture is important, and feeling like the executive team is creating a great environment. But my belief is that the direct manager has the biggest impact on the employee experience. And we were in a time where people would come to work and put their heads down and just do what they were told. And as this evolution has happened, I think people, they want to feel like they are professionals who they can bring their expertise. They want to be involved in decisions. They want to feel like they're contributing. And that takes a different type of leader than that traditional environment leader who just, is that more command and control. And I want to make a distinction because I think often when I talk about the traditional leader, it makes it sound like they were all bad. Yes, there were toxic leaders. I think there were
Hmm.
really good leaders for that time as well. The point is that what it took to lead effectively in that environment was keeping things on track, maybe jumping in the weeds and fixing. And now, as we've evolved, those skills and competencies that are required are much higher level, whether it's emotional intelligence. I talk a lot about moving from fixing to facilitating. So, as leaders, we can't be in the trenches all the time fixing, because now we need to be coaching and developing people. And I call this caretaking the culture. This whole piece wasn't very valued in the traditional environment. And in the
Hmm.
modern environment, it is. And so the demands of leadership are much higher. And so we have to be really intentional about how we're using that time with our team every day.
Yeah. I'm going to let the cat out of the bag here because I was saying earlier when I was introducing you, you know, you where you worked previously rated best place to work. However,
Mm-hmm.
um, there were some things that were outdated there. What was going on? Even like if it was a great place to work, what was
Yeah.
going on?
Yeah, and this was at a time where this evolution, I think, was really starting to shift. And we were in thought and in vision, I would say even ahead of the curve of focusing on organizational development and culture, which is important. Yet we were still running into some of the typical things that you run into in organizations, even if they're trying to evolve, which is people stuck in these outdated ways of leading. And some of them were even executives. And so we had these values on the wall, and I'm sure a lot of people can relate to this, where the leadership team goes through these exercises and you come up with great values and you put them on posters and they're on the wall and they look all pretty, but are people really living them? And so we had some leaders that were doing that really well and operationalizing it. But as an organization, there was still some struggle of that, and even at the senior leadership level. And that's important, that alignment of making sure that you're living your values, that they're just not things we say, but we're showing up. And an example of that could be one of ours, for example, was respect. And respect, is a huge value. But we had some high level leaders who would show up late to meetings, cancel meetings frequently, just not showing some respectful behaviors to their team and their staff. And those are the things that quickly start to erode and chip away at the trust and integrity in the team. And so,
Mhm.
no organization is perfect. But it became frustrating because, you have this vision of creating this great organization. It's not easy to get a whole team aligned around that.
Um, I imagine this is in your book, right? The Elevated Leader, but your programs focus on creating workplace cultures where people love to come to work. Are you able to give us some practical, like, take home strategies that we could use to implement, to foster like these environments?
Absolutely. So, at the core of what I talk about in the elevated leader is intentional leadership. And most people, my belief is that they come in every day and they're just reacting to what's coming at them. And so, part of this is understanding what your key result areas are. As a leader, what are the key areas that you have the biggest contribution for your team and for your organization? One of those, if you manage anybody, should be developing and coaching your team to bring out their best performance. And so we should be spending a lot more time on that than most leaders are. And yet most leaders are reacting. And so it
Mhm.
takes a real shift in our thinking of moving from that fixing in the trenches to really the caretaking, the culture piece, which is, what are my key result areas? How am I going to be intentional about how I build those into my day? I share a lot of different strategies in the book, and there are some really simple practices that I believe most people think are so simple that they don't think they're that powerful.
Yeah.
And, even how you're planning your day, do you take a few minutes at the end of the day and recalibrate and look at what did I get done? What are the most important things I should be working on, and plan for the next day? I'm amazed in my leadership courses how people don't do this. And it doesn't sound groundbreaking, but I
Right.
believe that the fundamentals matter. And it's often the fundamentals that, when you build these practices into your leadership, create the space for you to be able to truly influence and work in those areas. So, those are just a couple of things of, understanding your key result areas, planning your day the day before, blocking time for those key result areas. No one's going to come to your office and say, "Oh, you have so much going on. Let me take things off your plate and give you that time." We have to create that for ourselves. And so that's where we can start to coach people and really use that time in a meaningful way and not wasting it away in meetings that are not effective, or just chasing interruptions and people constantly coming at us with things they need done.
Yeah. So I like this, and I wrote it down. Fixing. We have to move from fixing to facilitating. In your opinion, why is that so important when we make that mind shift and actually do it?
Yeah, because most leaders are trying to solve problems and fix things, and they're not empowering their teams. And so the facilitation piece is when someone comes to you and says, "What should I do? How should I handle this?" you're starting to coach them through it so that you can build the capacity, build the skills on your team.
Yes.
And that could be a question. Well, what do you
Yeah.
think? What options have you thought of? What might be your approach? Building the critical thinking skills of your staff. I believe that a lot of people in leadership roles are not effective because their technical expertise gets in the way of them leading. They
Hmm.
believe that their technical expertise, whether it's finance or marketing or HR, is the value they bring to the organization. And it is in a sole individual role. That's what we're rewarded for is our technical expertise. But when we shift to a leadership role, that technical expertise can often be the very thing that gets in the way of people being successful as leaders because it's easy to jump back in the trenches and
Hmm.
fix and tell your team and direct them and not do the leadership part, which takes it takes more effort and energy to do. It's not just something to check off a list. So that's a different kind of way that we're leading our days.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier, which I've seen different reports, but about the same percentage. You said only 31% are engaged, and it's been hovering around that 31, 33, for a long, long time. And that to me, that's kind of scary. Like, because
Yes,
that means people weren't fulfilled. That means they could be taken easily. When you do something like that and you move from that mindset of fixing to facilitating, you talked about that empowerment piece. That empowers them to do their job, but that creates that stickiness. That creates the engagement that we're wanting. That's going to drive that engagement, the engagement rates for that particular company much higher than just that 31%.
that's right. And that's at a decade low, a
Yeah.
31%. So we're not trending up, we're trending down in engagement. And I just think that most people don't have the skills. And these are, they are teachable in some ways. I don't believe everyone's meant to be a leader. And
Mhm.
so, we've moved from this environment where most people could get away with basic skills and telling and directing and be fairly effective to now an environment where you really need high level skills to be able to influence people and connect with people. And so it's become much harder. And we have to make that shift. I mean, I think you mentioned in my bio about parenting and leadership. These are the two areas that we don't receive training, right? People will send a baby home with you and you have to figure
Yeah.
it out. And I'm amazed when I think back on my career, I received more training as a server at Dave and Buster's than I ever did as a leader. I had to
Yeah.
go seek that out myself. And I believe we need to really professionalize this as a true profession, have standards of what leadership is, and prepare
Hmm.
people before they get into that role. And also give people a peek behind the curtain of what it is before they get there and not just promote people. Let them know this is what's required and help them make the decision if that's aligned with what they really want in their career path.
Hmm. Well, let's talk about that. You mentioned parenthood. Uh, yeah, I love being a dad. I mean, I'm getting ready to be a grandfather here, and I've always found that those lessons that I've learned either in the company transfer over, and the lessons that I've learned at home a lot of times transfer over. And even getting back to this whole fixing versus facilitating thing, I've always tried to do that with my kids. Like, don't fix it for them, because then
Yes,
they're going to be entitled, right?
that's right.
Facilitate, and then they're going to be victims too. Like, if you just fix it for
Hmm.
them, right? If you just fix it for your people, they don't feel empowered. So then we get upset with them that they're not doing anything. Well, we haven't put them in the right state to do it. So how has kind of what have you learned from either parenting, vice versa, right? What have you learned from leadership that goes into parenting, parenting into leadership?
Yeah, well, it's interesting, Eric, because for me, that transition, it's not lost on me that the skills required for leadership of the coaching and the facilitating, asking questions, listening, absolutely transfers to parenting. Yet I struggle with that piece so much. I'll be transparent. I've really had to work on that and be intentional as a parent. So while it's been a lot easier for me to use those skills professionally as a parent, I think. And I think this goes to leadership as well. We're conditioned in certain ways. And so often it's how our parents parented us that we may take those on unless we're intentional about shifting that. And so I came from an environment where my parents were more traditional type of parents. You just do what I say and you follow directions and you don't question. And I think we're in a very different environment today, and our kids are exposed to different things, and we need to parent differently. And it's the same thing in leadership of many people were conditioned a certain way, that they were conditioned in this command and control, bureaucratic, top down type of leadership. And it's not easy to shift that thinking. You have to be really intentional and work on it. And I've talked with clients who maybe they had a more traditional CEO, and then they have someone who comes in who's more modern and really wants to create a great environment. And they still struggle with some people who can't let go of that conditioning of waiting to be told what to do,
Mhm.
of not stepping out and sharing their true ideas because they're afraid that they won't be listened to. And so it's not like flipping a switch. We have to really be intentional of shifting that mindset and those practices.
Yeah. Um, how can leaders cultivate workplaces to support employees in bringing their best selves to work while also maintaining, you know, a good personal life?
Yeah, I think this starts with well-being, which is the well-being of the organization, meaning the culture, the direct manager, being connecting with each of their employees and understanding who they are as people, and being able to shift your leadership based on that person. And so, just an example, I have a couple people on my team. One likes very direct communication. She's told me before, if I'm not doing something the way that you would prefer, just tell me. Tell me what you would like it to be and just be very direct. I have someone else on my team who needs a little bit more encouragement and for me to consistently share, you're on the right track. They're both high performers, but how I approach them is different, and there's some nuances that help bring out their best performance. And so this is where leadership is not just this plug and play. We need to be able to understand human beings, that they're different, the nuances of that, to ask questions, invite them into conversations, to cultivate environments of psychological safety where people feel like they can truly share their ideas, truly disagree. I think sometimes managers say that I want to hear these things from my people. I want them to share ideas, but they're not necessarily putting things into practice to cultivate that.
Hmm.
And maybe they don't even realize it, that they're unintentionally, sabotaging that where people are not speaking up. And so even in things of encouraging your staff by rewarding when people disagree, acknowledging that, asking for differing opinions, these are all ways that you can start to create a great environment where your employees want to bring their best to work. They feel that sense of well-being, and you're creating a thriving team.
As an executive coach, what's one common challenge you see mid-level and execs face, and how do you help them overcome it?
Yeah, so I think it goes back to that technical experience, this propensity to stay in the weeds in the technical and not elevate. And I talk in the book about what I call the six leadership saboteurs. And so I wouldn't say there's always one thing. It centers around technical experience, I find. And one of those is lack of focus, where people are just so overwhelmed and there's so many things going on that they're not focused on those key result areas. Lack of delegation is a huge one that I see. I'm curious if you see that in your work
Yes,
as well.
absolutely.
People holding on, right? And
Yeah.
and there's many reasons why people don't delegate, but often they're in that fixer mode of, oh, I
Hmm.
can jump in there and tell them what to do, or I have the answer. We don't always need to know all the answers. We need to facilitate people through the coaching questions and help coach them through. But that can get in the way too. Lack of self-awareness is
Yeah.
a big one, where, and this can be on a continuum. Some people are really more of that commanding and toxic type of leader, and they don't realize the impact they're having on others. But it could also be someone who talks too much and doesn't let other people in the conversation. So it doesn't have to be always, the toxic traits. It can be these small things that people aren't aware of. Lack of team engagement often stems from those. Like if I'm
Hmm.
not focused on people and I'm not self-aware, I'm not delegating, often that my team is not feeling engaged, which we
Hmm.
talked about. But a couple that have shown up a lot more recently that I've been seeing are conflict avoidance and passive
Yeah.
approach. And
Yeah.
so people who maybe don't have the confidence to facilitate tough conversations, which is an important piece of leadership, and I talk about this in the book, that they don't have to be confrontations. We can absolutely have a respectful conversation with someone that leads to a better outcome with skills that engage that person in the conversation. But passive leadership has really, I think, evolved a lot. In the technical world, we were jumping in and fixing, and now we have to move to facilitating. And I found that some managers and executives are just very passive. They wait for things to come to them, and they're not intentional and active around having team meetings, having individual meetings, providing feedback, building alignment on the team. And leadership takes a lot of active type of activities.
Yeah.
And if you're someone who isn't really intentional about that, quickly you can lose alignment and engagement on your team.
Absolutely. Let's go back to your book, right? One, how do people find you? What's the easiest place for people to look for you? Let's do that one first.
Sure. So my website, lauriemaddalena.com, is the best place.
Okay. And then the elevated leader. What would make somebody pick up that book? Like who needs to read that, Lori?
Yeah, I really geared this towards managers and certainly executives as well. So it's someone who's in a leadership role or aspires to be a leader. This book will show practical strategies for today's modern environment. I've really been intentional about ensuring that you can take away and implement immediately the things that we
Mhm.
talk about that I share in that book. So for that audience, for sure, and they can find that also on my website.
All right. You ready for our last question that we ask everybody?
Yes, I
I'm
am
always
ready.
interested in this. There's no right or wrong answer, but how would you describe your best day?
Well, when I first heard that question, I thought my wedding and my kids' births were certainly up there. But if I were to think about just overall in general, it would be a combination of feeling a day of alignment, whether that's facilitating perhaps with some managers where they leave feeling inspired, like they have skills to go back and do their work better and to create better workplaces that make their job easier, but also the combination of the personal side of having time with my family, probably in front of a fire. And a massage would be great in there too. I don't know if you can do all
Oh,
that
I
in
like
one
it.
day, but that's the hard part about
Yeah.
parenting and
Yeah.
working, right? Is trying to fit all the great things in one day.
A massage by a fire while somebody takes good care of my kids, right?
There you go.
All
Love it.
right. Well, thank you very much for being on. Again, guys, I think that book is worth reading to a lot who tuned into this, The Elevated Leader. I Yeah, can't wait to get my hands on that as well. So thank you again, Lori, for being on the show. Maybe we'll have you back in the future and talk more leadership, maybe even some parenting.
Would love that.
All
Thanks,
right,
Eric.
sounds good. If you want more information, folks, centerforvictory.com. And remember, wherever you're at, whatever you're doing, make this your best day yet. We'll see you soon.